Okay, so welcome, friends and Connected North at Home students. We're really excited to meet somebody who's coming to us from a long time ago and far, far away. Maybe not so far, far away from some people. River, he's coming from a far, far away place from you because you're in Iqaluit. So I'm going to introduce you to a medieval man. His name is Andrew. So Andrew, are you there?
Hello,
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. So we have our friends here. They're connecting from all over Canada, all the way from Nunavut, Ontario, BC, the Yukon, right across Canada. So they're really interested in the stories that you're going to tell them to talk about medieval life, as well as they're going to be posting their questions in something called a chat room, and I will read them out to you.
Oh, good, good. Because I don't know
Okay.
how to read, so that's a good idea.
Okay. So over to you, Andrew.
All right, thank you very much. This is very exciting, and hello to all you people. Um, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but in my time, we don't even really know about the land where you live. And this is the year 1432 here, and nobody really has gone there. Well, there's stories about the Vikings going across the Great Western Ocean and finding a land, but those stories are not well known, and a lot of people don't really believe them. So anyway, it's very exciting to know there's people out there, and thanks for meeting with me here today. They're using this from the future, which I have no idea how any of that works. We don't have that here in 1432, of course. But if you ever wanted to come and pay me a visit, if you can get back into 1432, you're welcome to come to my house and actually come here, and I'll have you in for a visit. Just come to the Kingdom of England and go to the village of Tintinhall. And when you get to Tintinhall, just look for the church. You can see it out my back window there. I live on Church Street. I'm the last house on Church Street, so it's really easy to find. If you go too far down Church Street, you're out in the field there. So anyway, if there's a way that you can do it, I'd be happy to have you come as a guest here. So anyway, I'll just tell you a bit about myself, and then you're welcome to ask me anything at all. And I mean, you're welcome to start asking things. I guess you're sending them in somehow through the technology, so you could start that anytime. But first, I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself, so you know where I'm coming from. So I'm a peasant. That's what most people are in this time. If you folks were born in this time and place, chances are pretty much all of you would be peasants as well. That's just what most people are. Almost everybody. There are nobles, but they're a very small minority of the population. And then, there's the king, and there's only one of those. So there's not a very good chance of being the king in this time. So anyway, I think you'd find it pretty different from what I've heard about your time. They say a lot of you go to school. Most people don't go to school here, so I've never been to school. It's really just people that are going to have a job working in the church that go to school, and you need reading and writing for that. Mostly what we need people doing is farming. And I'm a farmer, and that's what most people do. So if you grew up here, that's what you would be doing. And instead of going to school, you would be learning other things from your parents at home. So for guys, that would be working out in the fields. That's where I spend most of my time, growing crops out there, do a lot of plowing. So you'd be learning how to drive oxen and horses and plow. And the girls, your work would be a little bit more variety, because women do a lot of different things. So your mothers would be teaching you how to take care of a garden. There's a lot of work there. How to make clothing, how to prepare meals, how to look after babies and young children. And the women and girls look after a lot of the animals as well. They look after the cows, and they milk them and make butter and cheese. And They look after the sheep and the chickens. So a lot of things that they do. So there's lots for you to learn. It's just that it's done at home. And by the time you're 12, you're supposed to know most of it and be able to put in a full day's work along with the other adults. I mean, when you turn 12, you're kind of you're an adult in most ways. You're not totally an adult, but in many ways you are. So anyway, back to myself. I've been a farmer all my life, but there was a time when I was in the army. So I can tell you things about the war that I was in and being a soldier. Um, my parents and I had a big fight over who I was going to marry, and I ended up running away from home and joining the army. I don't know if any of you are married yet. I don't know how old people are. You know, in my time, girls can get married at 12 and boys at 14. So I don't know, maybe some of you are that age and you're married. I don't know if you're happy with the person that your parents chose for you or not. Me, I was really scared of the woman that they were trying to get me to marry. Her name is Alice Noseworthy, and she's a fine woman, don't get me wrong, but she's also one of the champion wrestlers in our village. And I've seen her break a man's arm in a wrestling match before. So I've always been a bit scared of her. And the idea of being her husband, I was just really scared of that. So my parents, I refused and they tried to force me. And so I ran away and I had to find a way to make a living. So I joined the army because King Henry was about to invade France and he was building up a huge army. And he wanted mostly peasants for his army because he wanted mostly archers. And archers are always peasants in this time. And so I have my bow here. If people are interested, you can ask more about that and the arrows that go with it. So I was over there in France for 10 years, and it was quite an adventure. We conquered half of their kingdom. We met Joan of Arc. Uh, anyway, things went well for a while, but then our king died, and we started losing. And I was badly injured in a battle, almost killed, and I was sent home. And I've mostly recovered, and I'm back here in my home village, and I'm farming, and I have a wife and children. And I'm here for you today at your service. And I have things I can show you, different tools that we use, sports equipment. I've got money in my purse, weapons, and it doesn't have to be, you know, you can ask about anything. You don't have to ask about an object. You can ask about anything at all. You know, what it would be like for you if you were going to live here in this time. Just whatever you're curious about. All right, so do we have any questions right off the start here?
Yeah, we have a question from Elise, and she'd like to know, what do you eat and drink?
That's a great question. There's a few different factors for what you eat here. One of the big ones is how wealthy you are. So if you're really rich, then what's considered the best food that rich people eat is a lot of meat. It's the most expensive and considered the best. And you know, the nobles and the royals, they go hunting, and that's part of their lifestyle is to go out hunting, and they eat the game that they hunt. They hunt, you know, deer and all kinds of different birds. Sometimes the wild boar, and that's part of the, you know, the tradition of it is to eat it and have a feast. So for the rest of us, we're not even allowed to hunt. And you know, we're the vast majority of people, and we're not allowed to hunt because it's reserved for the nobles. So the meat that we get is never from hunting unless you want to take the risk, and that's called poaching. And there's some pretty bad punishments if you get caught. In some parts of the kingdom, you can actually be executed for doing that. So you have to be careful. But no, for most people, if we eat meat, it's usually pork. So something from the pig, whether it's bacon or ham or pork chops. And then the other farm animals, we don't usually eat them unless they're really too old to be useful for anything else. And by that time, the meat isn't really that good anyway. Nobles will eat younger, fresher meat like lamb and calf, uh, but we rarely get that. Now, if you're a wealthier peasant, you have no trouble being able to have pork, but some of the poorer peasants can't afford to have that. They can't afford to buy it. They can't afford to raise pigs of their own. So they hardly ever get any meat. And pretty much most of their food is coming from the garden. So it's a lot of beans and peas and cabbage and onions and garlic, carrots, and um, a lot of the poor peasants don't even get bread because bread, there's a lot of work goes into making bread, growing the wheat out in the fields. There's a lot to that. Processing the grain and having it ground into flour and then making it into bread. So the poorer peasants, if they have any grain, that they've grown in their garden, they usually just boil it into a gruel or a porridge or something, and that's the best that they can do. They never get meat. Middle class peasants, they usually get a bit of meat and they can afford bread. Um, the white bread is the finest. That's just usually rich people that are eating the white bread. So yeah, those are your wealth influences what you eat. Oh, and our religion as well. We're not supposed to eat meat every day. I don't know if you can do that in your time, but we are told by the church that on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, it's a sin to eat meat. So what you can do instead is eat fish. So we end up eating a lot of fish because of those days of the week where we're told not to eat meat. And there's fish in the streams around the village that you can catch. There's eels. And then England is on an island, so there's lots of coastline where fishermen go out in boats and catch all kind of fish and sell it to people. So there's no trouble finding enough fish to eat. And we get nuts and berries from the forest and apples. People have apple trees and pear trees, and so there's lots of different things to eat, and it just kind of depends on your wealth, really, on what kind of foods you're eating. All right, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, and Elise wants to know as well, what is your house made from?
All right, so all of the houses in our village, all the buildings, the barns, the sheds, the houses, are all made the same way, except for the church, which you can see out the window there. And you might be able to see this, but it's made out of stone. It's all stone. Even the roof is made out of slates. So that's really expensive to build like that. Only the church and nobles can afford to do that. The rest of us, we build with this kind of construction. And what you have here is a framework made out of wood, timbers, and they're joined together. Quite often, there will be some main timbers that have a bit of a curve to them so that they can come together and meet and make an arch for the roof. So we've got that for our framework. And then in between, you can't see it now because it's been plastered over, but in between there's a basket weave, which we call wattle, and it's branches that have been woven together like a basket, but thicker, much thicker pieces than what this basket is made out of. And that is like a screen in between, and then it gets plastered over with what's called daub, which is a mix of clay and straw and mud and manure, and that is whitewashed over top of that. So when a house is new, it has a lighter color, but as time goes by, it starts getting a bit darker and dingier. And the roof, which you can't see on this house, is made out of straw. So we call that a thatch roof. And there's a guy in our village named John Thatcher, and that's what he does for a living is puts straw roofs on houses. It's a very skilled trade doing that properly, of course. You can't just throw a bunch of straw up there and hope that it doesn't blow away. If you are building a slate roof like our church has, then you're a slater. Or some of the fancier roofs you can get made out of tile, out of clay tiles, and then you're a tiler if you're doing that. But most people have a thatch roof, usually made from straw, sometimes made from rushes or reeds that grow in the marsh. The floor is dirt, but it's been well packed down, and it's covered with straw, and sometimes it's just regular straw, sometimes rushes from the marsh. Makes kind of a nicer sort of a carpet, you might say. And the room I'm in right now, this is our bed chamber. Our house is about 20 feet wide and 60 feet long. And in the upper end is what we call the bed chamber. And the whole family sleeps in here. So we have beds for the boys, and a bed for the boys, a bed for the girls, a bed for my wife and I, and a cradle for the baby in this one room here. And then the next room down is the main room of the house. It's called the hall. And there's a big flat rock on the floor there. And that's where my wife builds the fire. It's called the hearthstone. And then she cooks over that fire. We keep warm around it when we need to. And then the smoke goes up through a hole in the roof. And then we have a table. Actually, the tables have been moved in here so that I can show you some things. But these tables, you can move them around pretty easily. And they're on trestles. And when the weather's really hot, we eat outside. So you can easily take these apart and set them up in your yard. So we have tables and benches in the hall. And at the very far end, there's a room called the pantry, which is just a storage room for all of our things. All right, so that's how the house is made. If you're a poorer peasant, then you just have a cottage, and it's built much the same way, but it's smaller and it's just one room, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, something like that. All right, great question.
And Gibbler realized that you're 568 years old. He did the math.
Oh, really? Oh, I never thought about that. I don't feel that old, but I guess it depends how you look at it.
Yeah. Now, maybe you'd like to tell us about some of the things, maybe how you go hunting for food if you're going to do that, or protect your house or village, or there's some of those objects that you can share with us, because we see lots on your table.
Sure. Now you have to remember we're not allowed to hunt for food because that's just for the nobles. But if you're really interested in that sort of thing, I do actually have, and you have to promise not to tell anybody because I could get into trouble for this. But I do have a hunting arrow here, which has this special arrowhead on it, which is especially good for hunting birds. It's really hard to hit a bird, compared to other creatures because they're so small and they move quickly. So if you've got 2 points on your arrow, then you've got twice as much chance of hitting them, and it's a bit easier that way. So I do poach the odd bird, and the nobles don't care so much about that. They do like sometimes to hunt birds, but they're usually after bigger things. But other things here that you might find interesting. I mentioned before that the girls and women do a lot of work for making the clothing. Now I have some of that equipment here. So it's, excuse me, starts with this tool. So these are sheep shears, and this is how we get the wool off of the sheep. If you were to go to a barber in my time to get a haircut, they have scissors, and they're just the same except they're smaller. So that's what scissors are like. But anyway, the women and the girls do the shearing, and that'll be coming up in the next month or so. It's getting warmer. And then they take the wool, and we sell some of it to a wool merchant, but we keep some for making our own clothing. And you have to do a lot of processing before you can make clothing with it. The first job is to get the wool straightened out. And we use this tool here. These are called cards or carding brushes. And there's a bunch of little teeth in there. And you want to get the wool straightened out so that the fibers are all going the same way. and that prepares it for spinning it into thread. And by the way, you might have heard of this new game that's just been invented called cards. And there's pictures of kings and queens and things on these playing cards. And the reason they call them cards is because they're the same shape and size as this tool here. But these are the original cards. So anyway, you take some wool that you've carded, and then you're going to use this tool to spin it into thread. So this is called a spindle. And we actually have a fairly new invention called a spinning wheel that has a spindle built into it. But you can just use this on its own, and it works the same way. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I don't usually do any of this sort of work because the women do it. And so I'm not skilled with this, but you get it spinning around, and the spin twists the thread, and at the top, it twists the wool and attaches it and joins it with the rest of the thread. And it just keeps pulling the fibers in and twisting them together. Right? So that's how you spin thread. Girls, spend a lot of time doing this as they're growing up, and they carry a spindle under their belt so they can do some spinning if they're have a free moment when they're doing something else even. Boys don't usually do it. Boys sometimes do the carding though. When you're too young to go out to the fields with your father, then you stay with your mother and you can help with simple jobs like carding. But once you're about 5 or 6, you can start going out to the fields. So once you've got the thread, then you want to dye the thread the color that you want it. And you girls, if you lived here, your mothers would teach you how to make different colors of dye, which plants to use and how to mix them together. So you would have a vast knowledge about plants and how they can be used for not just for colors, but for medicines and for magic charms and some spells maybe. Some girls have a real gift for healing, and they learn a lot of those sorts of things. And they're often known as a witch, which means a wise woman. And people come to them for help with sicknesses or fortune telling or finding things that are lost, all kinds of things. So you've got your thread, the color you want it, then it has to be woven on a loom. I don't have a loom in here right now, but it's a fairly big machine that weaves the threads together. Then that makes cloth, and you have to beat the cloth to thicken it, and then it can be cut and sewn into clothing. So that's something that a lot of peasant families do for themselves, but there are professionals in the village that can do some of those things. We've got a guy named Christopher Dyer in our village that does dyeing as a career. There's Richard Fuller, who beats the cloth. There's Peter Weaver, who has a big loom. And then there's John Taylor that makes the actual clothes for you from the cloth. So those are job opportunities as well for guys. Girls are not allowed to go into a trade like that, but there is one exception. If you were to marry somebody, say you married Peter Weaver, and you would be allowed to work with him, work alongside him as a weaver. So you would be a weaver. And if he died before you, then as a widow of a weaver, you have the right to be a female weaver on your own. You don't have to have a man with you to make it all right. It's okay when your husband has died. So you wouldn't want to, you might think, well, the best thing would be to marry somebody for their trade and then kill them and then be on your own. But that's a very serious crime. It's not just murder, it's considered petty treason. It's like an attack on our society because women are supposed to be under the authority of their husbands, and that's how the society is supposed to be ordered. So if you go against that, it's an attack on the whole society. So it's treason. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there. Hopefully it's not like that in your time. All right, next question.
Okay, so I've got two questions here. Do you make your own bowls and glasses, and what are they made of? And then the second question is, was there ever a left-handed knight?
Hmm. All right, well, I'll answer that second question first. In the Army, there were some knights, the odd one that was left-handed. It is sometimes some people will discourage people from using their left hand for things like that because it's considered to be evil. It's not considered, the proper way of things. But some people just can't, that's their best hand. And if you're a knight and you're, fighting in a battle, you want to be using the hand that's going to keep you alive the best. So I did see some that did that for sure. What the cups and bowls?
Oh, we can't hear you, Andrew. The technology might have broken somehow. Try speaking again.
Can you hear me now? There must be an evil spirit at work that they say it pressed the mute button, and we don't know how that happened, except that maybe it was an evil spirit. So anyway, the bowls and plates and cups we use, if you're rich, they're usually made out of metal or even precious metals like silver or gold. For peasants, usually they're either made out of wood, like what I'm using here, and this was made on a machine called a lathe. There's a carpenter in our village named John Turner. And he's called Turner because he has a lathe and it spins the wood around and then he carves it while it's spinning. And he can make bowls and plates and cups that way. So you get a lot of things made out of wood. We also have them made out of clay. And there's a guy in our village named Harold Potter. He's called Harry Potter for short. But anyway, he takes clay and he spins it around on a wheel and he shapes it while it's wet and he makes cups and bowls and plates. But then he has to bake them in an oven, in a kiln, to make them harden and stick. So that's a common material for us as well. Some peasants are rich. They're quite a range for peasants. We're not all at the same level. So, some peasants do have fancier things and things made out of glass. There's a lot of cups and bowls and things made out of glass as well. And those are much more expensive, of course, as well as the metal ones. All right, good questions. Any other questions there?
This is an amazing, these are great questions. Amazing questions. Charlotte would like to know, could women be doctors or nurses like midwives?
Oh, that's a great one. Now, midwives for sure. And actually, I've never met any midwife that wasn't a woman. That's definitely a female trade. So I should have mentioned that when I was saying about trades that women can't do them, because midwife is one of the exceptions where it's just women doing it because it's considered a very female domain that they're operating in with helping women that are pregnant and helping them give birth. Midwives also traditionally help when somebody has died. They will help prepare the body for burial. So they have quite an interesting kind of a job that they do. And being a witch, that's sort of like being a doctor. Peasants, we don't usually go to the doctor. So witches are really our doctors, and they are almost always women as well. If it's a man, he's called a wizard. So it's almost always witches, though it's more common with them. It's part of the knowledge that is passed on through the generations of women of how to do healing. And women just seem to have that kind of a talent and that kind of a power, you might say, for healing more than men usually do. Doctors, a woman would not be able to be a doctor, not likely, unless, I mean, if she was married to one and he died and she knew a lot about it, then people might continue coming to her if they figured she knew what she was doing, then that would probably work. But there's not that many doctors in this time because it's mostly just the rich people that use them, and there's not that many rich people. They have a very different way of operating. They will read in a book to try to figure out what's wrong with you, and they'll read the stars and the planets in the sky, and they'll take a sample of urine from you, and they will look at it, and they will smell it, and they will taste it to try to figure out what's wrong. And then from there, they usually say, well, you've got too much blood in your body and you need to get rid of some. So they'll send you for a bleeding where somebody will cut you and drain blood out of you. Or they might say you have too much bile and you need to do some vomiting. And so they'll give you a prescription for some kind of a potion that will make you vomit a lot, or that will give you diarrhea to purge you. So those are usually the kind of treatments that a doctor would give you. Otherwise, there's also barbers, and a woman can't go become a barber on her own, but if her husband was, then she could. And barbers often do surgery as well. And they, pull teeth if someone's got a tooth that's been badly damaged by tooth worms. They also, last time I was at the barber, actually, I saw this one guy was there and he got run over by an ox cart and one of his legs was so badly broken that the bone setters, well, there's another trade, bone setters. He went to a bone setter, and bone setters will be, they're experts with bones, and if they're broken, they're good at lining them back up and splinting them so that they'll grow back together. And they can help you if things are out of joint with your bones. And you do get some women actually doing that as a trade that allowed to do that. But anyway, this guy went to the bone setters and they said that leg is just so badly broken, it won't heal. And it was rotting from the wounds that got dirty. And the rot was going to spread through the rest of his body and kill him. So he went to the barber and the barber sawed the leg off for him. And then that saved him from dying from the rot. So barbers often are doing amputations as well. So, that's something that you could be involved in as a woman if you were married to a barber. But no, usually all women are involved in the healthcare because the first person you go to if you're not feeling well or have some kind of a problem is to your wife or your mother, because all women have some knowledge of healing and simple medicines and things like that. And if she can't handle it, then you go on to a witch or a midwife if it's something in the child pregnancy and childbirth area. All right, great question. That's always an interesting thing around here.
Yeah, it sounds very different from what's happening in another 500 years. Guys, do you have any other questions, or would you like to know about money or how much things cost?
I'm happy to talk about that. I've got money here.
Okay, and Charlotte wants to know, can a peasant marry someone like a king or a queen? Before you talk about...
There is no law to prevent that. I've heard that in some kingdoms there's actually laws that would prevent a marriage like that. But in England, there is no law, but it's almost impossible that would ever happen. What you do get, I mean, it would be so strange for that to happen. A marriage of a royal family member is always to somebody very important. Their marriage is very valuable. It will form an alliance, with another kingdom. The French princess was married to our king, and to try to bring peace between our kingdoms. So you can't waste the marriage of a royal on a peasant that would serve no purpose. So it's pretty much impossible. There are marriages that happen sometimes between peasants and nobles. Like I was saying before, some peasants are quite wealthy. It all depends on how much land you have. And some peasants have, well, a lot of us only have, say, 10 or 20 or 30 acres of land. That's fine to get by on. But some have much more. If you have 120 acres of land, you're automatically considered a noble, whether you have noble birth or not. So a peasant with that much land would be very attractive to a noble that is, poor. They've lost their money somehow, or they're on hard times. And a marriage between those two families could be beneficial to both of them, because the peasant family gets the noble title and prestige, and the noble family gets money and a better source of income for their estate. So that does happen. It's not unheard of for that to happen. Great question. So the money you might find interesting, because I'm going to guess that that's changed a bit in 500 or so years, and maybe we can do a bit of a comparison here. I'll just show you our main coin. This is made out of silver, and it's called a penny. And as a comparison, how much would it cost in your time for a loaf of bread, say, assuming that you still eat bread in your time?
They don't know how much a 250, Aaron says. $5, Gibbler says.
Now, could you convert that to pennies, perhaps?
Yeah, but remember, they're in a remote part of Canada where things cost a bit more. So let's go with $5.
Oh, and how many pennies would that be?
500.
Oh my goodness. For one loaf of bread, 500 pennies. That's kind of crazy to me, because in this time, this one penny can buy 4 loaves of bread. If you just want one loaf of bread, all you need is a quarter of a penny. And that coin is a quarter the size of the penny. It has a quarter as much silver. It weighs a quarter of the penny. And it's called a farthing, which means a fourth. So a penny is fairly valuable, because you can buy 4 loaves of bread. How much do you think 2 loaves of bread costs here in my time?
.5 pennies, Gibbler said. He's a good fraction guy. 1 penny, says Gabby.
Yeah, 1 penny is 4 loaves. And I don't know if 0.5, I've never heard that kind of number before, but maybe that means the same as a half, because that's what it is. It's a half penny. So you can cut the money into pieces if you need to make change. You can cut it into quarters as well. The cross that's on one side helps you to line it up. And by the way, the king's face is on the other side. This coin's a little bit worn, so I don't know if you can see King Henry on there or not. But anyway, it's the king's money, so he gets to put his face on there. And you're not supposed to mess around with the king's money. I mean, some people are tempted sometimes. If you look at this penny, look at it and, does it look like a perfect circle to you? This one definitely is not. People clip the edges off of coins in order to steal bits of silver. And if they do that to enough coins, then they've got a fair value of silver that they've stolen. And if you get caught doing that, you get one of your hands cut off, because it's the king's money and you're not supposed to mess around with it. But that's why if you're dealing in larger amounts, say if you're going to buy a horse from somebody and they would say they wanted 240 pennies for that horse, And that is what we call a pound, because 240 pennies, if you weigh them, are supposed to weigh 1 pound. But if they have the edges clipped off of them, then 240 of those are not going to weigh 1 pound. You might have to put 250 pennies in. So when people are doing, sales with larger amounts, then you have to use weigh scales so that you can be sure that you're getting the right amount of silver. We also have a bigger silver coin. This one is called a groat. That's worth 4 pennies. So that's 16 loaves of bread. That's about a day's pay for a man with skills, getting paid by the day. Most of us, since we're farmers, we don't get paid by the day. There are a lot of servants in this time, and farm laborers get paid by the day. But most of us as farmers, we just get paid when we sell something. You sell some extra grain. And the last time I sold extra wheat, I actually got paid in gold. So this is our most valuable coin, called a noble. That other one was called a groat. I don't know if I mentioned that, but anyway, a noble is worth 80 pennies. So I could buy 320 loaves of bread with this coin. I could buy a cheaper horse, a good cow. And 3 of these makes a pound of silver. Now, you don't have to use coins. We also sometimes just trade things if they're equal value. For example, when I got these shoes from John Shoemaker, I just traded him shoes for a pig. They're both worth about 12 pennies, which is what we call a shilling. And he threw in these pattens here that this part comes off. You put these on when the weather's wet, and the wood keeps you up out of the mud and the wet a bit better, and keeps your feet drier and warmer. But anyway, sometimes it's handy to just trade things, but if they're not equal value, then that's when money comes in handy. All right, so any other questions that have come along?
We did have a question from, there's 2 more. Can you explain how the landlord and the rent from a landlord works in medieval times?
Sure. So being a landlord is really good. Of course, that's what everybody would love to be, because it means that you have enough land that you don't have to work the land yourself. You can just rent it out, and you have enough rent money coming in that you can live off of that very nicely and hire servants to do all the things that you need done, all your cooking and cleaning and so on. So that's what the noble lifestyle is all about. And some peasants actually have got to that level, and have land that they're renting out to other peasants and hire servants. And my family actually has a couple servants as well. We're not rich, we're fairly wealthy, but we've got enough land that we can afford that. But no, so the land is rented out. In theory, it all belongs to the king. And the way that the lords pay their rent to the king is supposed to be through military service. So if the king needs an army, then he's supposed to be able to get his lords, the nobles, to provide warriors. And that's how it worked originally. Now, a lot of the nobles aren't really warriors necessarily. I mean, some of them are. So they can pay a special tax to the king, and then he can pay to hire other soldiers like me, which are actually more useful because archers are a lot more deadly than knights. So that's how it works with the nobles, with their rent for the land they have. And for us, paying rent to the nobles, some peasants have always paid rent just with money or with goods, like food that you've produced on the land. But then there's also been a tradition where some of the peasants, maybe half of them, pay their rent in the form of work. And so you would have to be working in the fields of your lord part of the day as part of how you pay your rent. And those kinds of peasants are what we call serfs. In England, we also call them villeins, and it means that you're not totally free. It's a lot of people. It's become a thing that a lot of people don't like anymore, and are trying to get away from. And since the Black Death killed so many peasants and made a shortage of peasants and workers, a lot of lords have been forced to make their peasants totally free and not keep them as serfs anymore. Because if you don't like how your lord is treating you, then now, because there's a shortage, you can run away to another lord who could treat you better. Before the Black Death killed so many people, there was really nowhere to run to. There were so many people around. There were no openings to take on anymore, really. So there was no point in trying to leave. And otherwise, it was hard to make any changes because tradition is very powerful in this time, and it's very hard to make changes to something that has been around for a long time. But now that the trend is towards paying your rent just using money, using coins. And we do that 4 times a year. And the rent for 1 acre is about 10 pennies to 12 pennies a year for each acre. So hopefully does that answer your question about rent?
Yeah, that was a great answer. And Aaron would like to know, what is a tooth worm?
I was hoping someone would ask about that. I don't know what kind of things you've got for teeth there in the future, but tooth worms are a real problem in this time. They're invisible. They're so small, these worms, and they feed on teeth. So they get in your teeth. I don't know if you still get holes in your teeth there in the future, but that's what causes them is tooth worms. But that's what we think anyway, right? So there's different ways of getting rid of them. I talked about going to the barber, and barbers will pull teeth out. That's kind of your last resort, you know, when they're just so badly chewed up that there's no saving them. If you catch them early enough, there's a couple magical cures. If you can walk around your church backwards 3 times and never think of a fox's tail while you're doing that 3 times around, that will magically kill any tooth worms that you might have in your mouth. Also, you can get a magic candle and a bowl of holy water, and you light the candle, put it in your mouth beside the tooth where the worms are, and the worms will jump out of the tooth and they'll go into the bowl of holy water to cool off. And then that will kill them because it's holy water and they're evil and it's good, and that will kill them. So those are some things that you can do before they get too bad. Some peasants will go to we don't have a barber in our village, so if you need to get the tooth pulled out, sometimes your friend can pull it out for you. If it's a tough one to get out, then you can go to the village blacksmith, that works with steel and iron, and they've got, these tongs and pinchers that they hold the hot metal with, and those are good, for grabbing things, and they can grab a tooth and pull it out for you as well if you need it.
Wow, what a process.
Yes, yeah, it's not really fun, I wouldn't say, but that's just part of life, right?
So what do Elise wants to know, and Charlotte said that sounds terrible. Charlotte would like to know, what is the most expensive thing you own or most priceless? And Elise and Alec would like to know, where do the kids live when they grow up?
All right, those are great questions. So the most valuable thing that I own, I would have to say that it would be, I've got 2 horses, and horses are the most valuable farm animal, and they're pretty much the most valuable thing that I actually have. I mean, they're a creature, but each of them is worth 2 pounds of silver. So they're good young farm horses. They got lots of good working years ahead of them. So yeah, um, these bright red leggings here, that's fairly expensive as well. The color red is a very expensive dye. We can't produce it here in England. It has to be imported from other kingdoms. So these, I mean, they're not worth as much as my horse, but sometimes I like to brag about them just because they're kind of fancy. Anyway, the other question, what happens to children? Where do children live when they grow up? Now, that really depends on the child's position within their family. It's the birth order. So if you want to think about what might happen to you if you lived in this time and in the same birth order, if you're the oldest son in your family, then you will probably stay in the house that you grew up in, because the way we usually work it is that the oldest son inherits all of the family's property when the parents, usually before they die, they will pass it on to their oldest son. And you might think that's not fair. What about the other children? And in some ways, it's not fair. But if you divide it up amongst all the children, then you're dividing up a farm into small pieces, and then they all have a small farm that isn't as prosperous anymore. And the family has gotten poorer overall because they're all not able to live as well. So we like to keep the farms all in one piece so that they're prosperous and that the family does well. So you have to, for the other children, you have to come up with other things. Now, if you were in a family where it's just girls and there's no oldest son, then sometimes the oldest daughter is who gets the property. And then in some parts of the kingdom, it's divided up amongst those girls if they have no brothers, because that's kind of unusual. It's unusual to have a family with no boys in it. Now, for a family that's got a mix of boys and girls, the girls are kind of a lot of them end up becoming servants, working in somebody else's home or working for the lord of the manor. If your family is wealthy enough, then they will try to marry you off, find you a husband, and what they need for that is something called a dowry. And I don't know if you still have this. Do you have dowries in the future that when you get married?
I don't think so.
Did you have one? I'm sorry, I don't even know if you're married there, ma'am, but
Yeah. Did I have one? No. Did you? Did your wife?
yes, yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have married her. Nobody will marry a woman usually unless she comes with a dowry, which is some kind of wealth. It's portable. It's like a bunch of money or some valuable clothing or some farm animals, and that's what attracts a marriage usually. If you're really poor, sometimes two poor people will get married and there's no dowry, but usually there is. And so it has to be from a wealthier peasant family usually in order for these girls to be able to get married like that. And so for boys, uh, if your family's wealthier, then and you're not the oldest son, then you might get an apprenticeship. Uh, for my younger sons, I'm getting an apprenticeship for one of them, for William. He's apprenticing with the village tailor, and my younger son Edward is going to be a carpenter. So that costs money as well because they have to go and live with that tradesman for 7 years in their home and learning all the skills of those trades. But then after 7 years, they can go into that business themselves. And then they'll likely get married because they have a way of supporting a family. That's what men have to have in order to get married. Usually, if you have no way of supporting a family, nobody's going to want to marry you. If you're from a poorer family, then the younger sons often become servants or they join the army. That's where a lot of the soldiers come from. All right, so that's how it works. Oh, there's one more exception. Girls who have an older, or or sorry, they have a brother who inherits the property. They're allowed to stay after their parents are gone with their brother and his family, an unmarried aunt. And as long as they're contributing to the household, they can do that. And what they usually do is a lot of spinning on the spindle. So they're called spinsters. I don't know if you still use that name there in the future for an unmarried aunt, but that's really what it means, a spinster. It's a woman who's stayed in her house where she grew up with her brother's family, and she contributes by spinning.
And how Charlotte wants to know, how many kids do most families have?
It kind of depends on how wealthy the family is. The poorer peasants, they usually only have 2 or 3 children that will survive. They have more that are born, but sadly, their children are less likely to survive. When diseases come around, those children are more likely to die because they're not as well fed, they're not as healthy, and the wealthier families have more children that survive. So, my family, we've got 6 children. That's considered a fairly normal size family. Bigger families, I mean, you can have more children than that. There is a family in our village that has 17 children. That's considered large. People will comment on that and say, well, that's a big family. But, having 6, between 6 and 10 children is fairly normal and good. People think that's a good size.
That's amazing to have that many kids in one family. Are there any, we only have a few minutes left, Andrew. Are there any really cool, super cool tools that are on the table that you think the students would enjoy seeing?
Sure, I can show you a bunch of things here. Let's see, for guys, actually for girls too, when harvest time comes, girls don't usually work in the fields, but at harvest time they do. And we want to get things harvested as quickly as possible, so we need everybody's help. So I have some harvesting tools. This is the sickle, which you cut the grain down with. There's a bit of wheat, so you grab hold of it with one hand and you cut with the sickle. You grab a whole bundle of it in one hand. And so that's how you harvest. And then I have a tool here that comes next. You want to get the seeds off of the stem, and you do that by beating grain. You lie it on the floor of your barn, and you beat it with this tool. This is called the flail, and you swing it around so that this part comes flying around. It crashes down on the grain and knocks the seeds off. You have to do that over and over again, and it's called thrashing when you do that. So there's those things. Oh, this is for planting the seeds. I'm going backwards here. But you wear this around your neck and you fill it with seeds and you scatter them out over your field. That's called sowing. And the job of the boys is to scare away the birds that will try to eat the seeds before you get them raked into the dirt. So one thing that the younger boys will do is just chase the birds and throw stones at them and maybe ring a bell at them. That works fairly well. But what's even better are the older boys are usually good with a slingshot, and I've got a slingshot here. We braid these out of rope, and you put a stone in here that's about the size of an egg. You get it twirling around, and as long as it's twirling, the stone's going to stay in there. And then you let go of one end, and then the stone goes flying out. And boys can usually hit a bird if it's 100 feet away or so. They practice this all the time, so they're quite good.
And maybe to end off, Andrew, Gibbler would like to see if you have any weapons there.
Sure. Now, some of these tools have been made into pole weapons. They mount them on a pole, and foot soldiers use them, like the sickle has been done. This is our hedge trimming tool. It's called the bill hook. And these are mounted on a pole as a weapon as well. And then there's my longbow, and this is what we use in the English Army. You can't see it in your window there very well because it's so tall, but it's usually as tall as the archer that's using it. And then I can show you the arrows. I showed you the one arrow for hunting birds, but there's other ones that are for different purposes. And the standard one has the barbs on it, like this one, which makes it very hard to get out once it gets into you. You're often better to push it out the other side and have somebody cut the head off rather than try to rip it back out again. This one has no barbs, and we use this one to go through a knight's armor. It's got the same kind of a tip on it as a sword in this time, and they're designed to puncture a knight's armor. You can't cut through their armor very well. So we used a lot of those in France. And then this is a horse killing arrow. During battles, if the knights are charging at you on horseback, you want to try to shoot their horses with a bigger arrow like this, since it's a bigger creature.
Wow, that was amazing. So, Andrew, I know that you need to go and work in your fields, and we need to go and meet an innovator soon in about half an hour. But thank you for joining us, and I understand that we have another connection with hopefully it'll work with a loyalist soldier who has lots of weapons and guns and things to show.
Oh, yeah, Gibbler wants to see the weapons, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us in the future, and we learned so much. Like, you are so knowledgeable because you're living it about medieval times.
Yeah, it's hard not to know about it when you live here. But thank you. It was great to meet you all. You had wonderful questions, and it was really fun for me to meet you today. So thank you very much.
Thanks. So and I think I understand we're seeing you again for medieval music and dance in about a month.
Oh, that's right. Yes, they asked me to round up as many musical instruments from the village as I could and show you some dances and things. So that's fun stuff too, for sure.
That'll be great. So take care, guys, and we'll see you in about a half an hour for Paul. Bye, guys. Thanks, Andrew.